Today's episode of Beyond Ray was sparked by talking about Yona, a speculum redesign project, and dives into solo, mission-driven work, building a network of advisors to continue moving forward and becoming a conduit for learning, all with a healthy dose of curiosity.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Beyond Ray. Today we have a guest for you, Fran Wang. Fran is a co-founder of Yona, which is a project of a speculum. For those who are not sure what speculum is, it's like this scary thing they put up your vagina to do a pap smear or get you IUD. And it's very uncomfortable. Luckily, there are people like Fran down in Bay Area who are working on improvement and innovation. And what's super interesting is like for this time, we bring an engineer. Yes, Fran is an engineer by education, but what you would see through this conversation, hopefully, is that your degree doesn't really mean you can't develop a product like designers like to think they're the only ones able to do that. So Fran, welcome. And could you please start telling us more about like Yona and what you're currently working on?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Fran. Really excited to be here. So thank you for having me. I am a mechanical engineer. I'm outed as an engineer, not a designer, but I would like to think that at this point I have empathy for designers. I'm a co-founder of Yona, as described, and Yona is a redesign of the speculum. What we're working on right now is focusing on some engineering development, as well as just better understanding the business needs behind Yona and really talking to the providers out there and understanding and learning from them, the people who are actually doing exams and procedures every day, what they need and what they see in their practice.
I was reading on the Yona website about its background, and I think also checking through previous interviews you had done with With Chicago. So the speculum hasn't been redesigned. It's existed for 200 years in basically the form that we generally know it today. So that's totally true. It's pretty much unchanged.
Yeah, it's wild to think that, but it is true. I mean, there are even earlier iterations of the speculum, like stuff that they've dug out of archaeological sites, but the speculum as we know it currently is largely unchanged. And its history is horrible. If you haven't read about it, it's rooted in a ton of racism, misogyny. It comes from a really dark period of time, and there's a lot of medical ethics questions that come up with the development of the speculum.
It's wild to think that there wasn't as much questioning of that, or at least that consumers know about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because the speculum is a thing that people don't know about. In the past X many years that we've worked on Yona, yes, we've seen people talk about it more and just talk about reproductive care more openly. But even when we started, there were many times when we would talk to people and they would say, I've never seen a speculum. And these are people who've gotten exams in their life and they have just been a patient. And that is often the dynamic we see in clinics where some providers don't want to share that with the patient because it is really scary looking. And some patients don't know to advocate for it. So they might not even know what it looks like, which means they're definitely not looking into what it's called or even further down what its history or origin is.
Wow, that's actually wild. So you're saying people that have had a speculum used on them still have no idea what the device looks like or even does. Like it just is going into them without their awareness of the tool at all.
Yeah,
That is so upsetting.
it's super upsetting. I mean, I think it's changing, right? There's a lot more. A lot of the providers I've been talking to have talked about how communication and education have changed. It hasn't caught up to the times for sure, but it's definitely changed. So there are now more providers who have learned about giving exams with education as a component of it. So, they're bringing the patient along the journey of asking them, would you like to see the speculum? So giving them that agency of deciding for themselves if it's something they want to see, because some people might not want to, and that's fine. And some people do want to know. And so some providers will give the option of, do you want to see the speculum? And if so, here's what it is, here's what it does, here are the steps that I'm going to take. Are they okay with you? And then some providers also give the option of, I can provide you a mirror so you can see what I'm doing so that you are part of the process and you have just a better understanding of what's happening.
That's a cool option. Yeah, I don't think that's ever been a conversation I've had in the doctor's office.
It's not super common yet.
You've alluded to the history a little bit. Can you actually give us a bit more detail on that before we keep going? Because it seems really pertinent.
Yeah. So the inventor, we'll call it in air quotes, of the speculum is a man named J. Marion Sims. He practiced in the 1800s, and he developed the speculum by practicing on enslaved women. The three women that he practiced most on are Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, and I think it's really important to mention their names because they are part of that history, but they are otherwise largely erased. You'll see J. Marion Sims often referred to as the father of gynecology, which is an irony and a horrible one. He developed this by testing on them repeatedly without anesthesia in order to develop a tool to help him come up with a procedure to fix postpartum fistulas, which is like a really horrible affliction that a lot of people who have children, after they have children, they have this. And there was no procedure at the time to fix it. And so he practiced on these enslaved women and developed this tool. And that is the tool that continues to be used.
How did the project start, and how do you arrive for an innovation for a product that was like so unchanged and undeveloped for such a long time?
Yeah, so we started, it was myself and three other women, the four of us, looking at the pelvic exam experience as a whole. At the time, all four of us were working at Frog Design. We spent a lot of time thinking about experience design and how to make experiences in the day-to-day better. You know, we can think about like, how is it a good way to order food on your phone? How is it a better way to, you know, like fix something in your home? But we never were able to ask, why is the pelvic exam so horrible? So we just turned the lens towards that to understand these touch points of why is it so bad. And the speculum is one of those touch points amongst many. There's like the moment of waiting in the waiting room. There's the moment of, you know, the door closes and you're supposed to take all your clothes off and pile it somewhere. There's the moment when you're sitting on the table and they're like, okay, scooch down, scooch down, scooch down. And you keep going and you're going to fall off the table and it's horrible. And all these things are universal. But at the time, you know, nobody really talked about it. It was sort of this like secret horrible thing that everybody did. And then, you know, it might come up if you had like some sort of like hang out with a close friend, but it wasn't something that was talked about. And if you don't talk about it, you can't address it or fix it. So that's where we started of like, let's make that better. So we were talking about the pelvic exam overall. And then within that, the speculum is now like a physical touch point within that journey.
So when you started, how much were you able to see ahead of time the challenges of working on a medical device like this? Like that it's maybe not quite as simple as making a lower stakes item or a less regulated item?
I think even then we knew that change in the medical world is really hard and takes a really long time. But when we first started, we were not setting out to start a company. We were starting to think about this as like a provocation of like, how can we just talk about something to make it better? And so when we started, it was very much more about like a thought that we wanted to share with other people and get other people to think about it and talk about it as well. So we knew that change would take a long time, but we did not really anticipate that we would be part of it other than to start it.
Where did that switch flip from somebody should do something about this with the info we have to we should do something about this with the info we have?
We launched our website after our phase of work. And at the time we were like, okay, we did it. Like the website's out. We did our interviews. Like that was awesome. And the influx of interest that came in was really kind of what confirmed that this needed to happen. And if we're already doing it, why wouldn't we continue to do it? We kind of found something that already had a lot of traction and a lot of interest that was already there. We just tapped into something that had already existed. And that was kind of the beginning of continuing.
How did you understand the real stakeholder behind such projects? Because like you want to make experience better for patients, but none of this would happen if providers and clinics wouldn't have a buy-off from you.
Yeah, this is an ever-growing question. I think when we first started, we understood, you know, the patient and the provider are both key. The patient experiences it in one way, and the provider also experiences the speculum in their own way too. And we had a really good understanding that we wanted to balance the needs of both. The journey has continued, and that question keeps on getting bigger. Now, beyond the provider, we're also thinking about, you know, the provider's leadership. You know, the people who are making the decisions on what choices of things go into the clinic, or what are the standards of care that go into all the practices across the board. We're now starting to think about the operational side. Who makes the budget decisions to decide what things happen when and at what costs? You know, when you start talking about equipment that has processes behind it, like an autoclave, you now think about, okay, there's an operational cost that's associated with it. So the question keeps on getting bigger. You can always find additional users or stakeholders in this process. So that's ongoing, and we're still chasing that down.
So another big question about how Yona continues as a project is like that right now it's a single person project. and it doesn't operate with any like VC funding, right? But that's certainly a path that you could go down. Is there a reason that you operate the way you do today?
Yeah, this is a question I get asked a lot and a question that I ask myself a lot, like
Mm.
what am I doing? And specifically around financing a venture like this. VC has always been an option and there is a pathway to do it. And there are a wide range of VCs, some that are specifically focused around health tech. There are VCs out there who I think I could ask. I think personally, I have hesitated from asking because I feel like Yona is such a mission-driven product that it feels really at odds with venture capital and the need to get a strong ROI on a product. It feels personally conflicting to say that I want this product to be a better experience, which theoretically would cost more, but I also want it to be available for everybody. And so automatically I've already, created a product that inherently is not maximizing profit. And I'm okay with that, but I'm not sure that I would necessarily find a VC who would be okay with that also. And so I've generally shied away from that pathway. And I might be completely wrong. And maybe this is a path that I should be looking more into and trying to find the right partner for. But that's been one of the main reasons. And I think just also economically speaking, speculums are not like massively profitable products. People are not making bank on speculums. And so I'm not sure that VCs would be interested in a product like that.
That's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of things in the healthcare industry that do generate a lot of money, whether they should or not. So I guess I don't know how financially viable speculum projects are. Is that part of why there aren't a lot of innovations there?
Yeah, that is one of the main reasons, sadly. And it's also been interesting to find that, when you have a product that's value add is experience, you have to really market it in a way to then be able to quantify it. And that's really, really relevant to me right now. It's what I'm trying to understand and learn how to talk about in a way that's true to the product, but also present a case that makes it a viable product in the long run.
Congratulations, you're a designer. You have to try to quantify something that's an experience and
Yeah.
prove its value. Like, I think we've all been there.
That's
Yeah.
so true. Are there comparable products that are, really like improving experience, but do get more traction because of the field that they're in? Like, I'm curious how much of this is driven by the fact that it's for, predominantly women, vaginas.
Yeah. So I think that question has two parts. One is like the alternative experiences that are really experience driven. And I think you can look at a lot of app based products as ones that improve experience, and those experiences are what makes the app valuable.
Mhm.
I think of Uber and Lyft, right? Like the experience of calling a car is so much easier and faster than trying to flag down a car that it has become so much better that it's now profitable. Of course, there's like a lot of different challenges with that. There's still, it's not like purely digital. There's like a whole physical world behind it. So I'm not trying to trivialize that, but I think that's an experience that has really become monetized. And then I forgot the second question. I'm sorry.
I think I was considering in particular like comparable medical products and if
Okay.
there are any that do get a lot more traction just by the nature of the area of medicine that they're in, whereas this is actually getting left behind, or if this is a generally really challenging type of thing to tackle.
I think generally medicine is hard overall. I think especially when the product or procedure is associated with women's health, for lack of a better, more comprehensive word, it's really challenging. I also think that when a product gets used in places where patients might not see it, so the OR, or in a position of where like a lot of people don't see the speculum, it gets even harder to sell a product like that. In terms of medical products that have an experience that have changed it, I don't think it's necessarily a medical device or product, but I do think there's a growth in concierge medicine that's really changed a lot of medicine's experience. There's a lot of direct to consumer products as well that has also changed how people perceive or expect their medical experience to go.
So I think we can back up a little bit since we established how, in fact, you are doing design and are living the experience of a designer.
Yeah.
But let's walk back a little earlier when you started your career and you weren't doing design, you were doing engineering. Talk to us a little bit about those early days.
Yeah, for sure. I moved out to San Francisco a long time ago, it feels like. And I started working at a startup in the drone space, and the drone space was super sexy at the time. Everybody wanted drones. It was not clear what we were going to use them for, but everybody wanted one. And I was working as an intern at first. And then because it was a startup, it was super small. I was a mechanical engineer, but I also helped with manufacturing and some QA and also ordering and sourcing, logistics, kind of had my hands in a lot of things. And I worked there for 3 years. And I feel like that time, especially the manufacturing side of things, it was very low volume manufacturing, but it still got me into the headspace of thinking about how things are eventually created and how the creation of the thing is usually involving a person who has to do it by hand or eventually down the line, a machine or, like a production line. But thinking about what that process is has affected a lot of how I think about products now. And so I'm very appreciative that I did that early on.
Yeah, and then between there and getting to Frog, so it was that job at the drone company that you actually laid off, right? After the 3 years. And you told us that like this was kind of a distressing, you took it pretty hard.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I got laid off. I was, I think, like 26 or 27 at the time. No, it was earlier. Oh my gosh, yeah, it was even earlier than that. And it was my first job out of school, and I got laid off. And I took that super personally. I took that as a reflection of me and my performance as an employee. And I think that at the time I came out of that, and the verdict in my head was that I'm unemployable. Like my value here has proven to become zero. And I think I was really hard on myself at the time. Like I took that entirely personally rather than looking at, like there's probably a personal piece to it, but there's also a larger economic piece to it that I didn't see at all or refused to see even. And so getting laid off was really hard for me. And it took me a while to get back into the headspace of like, that was one thing. And now I'm moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, and then I think you were faced with a bit of a fork in terms of like what your next move was if you were going to keep working on drones or like seek something else out. How did you make a decision, set a goal, go after it?
After I got laid off, I think I had a bit of a crisis of like, okay, well, if that wasn't it, like, what am I doing? Like, purpose, the whole thing, like, did the whole existential crisis. And then at the time, there were other drone companies reaching out of like, okay, well, if you're now a fun employee, do you want to come work here instead? And I had to really think about if that was a pathway I wanted to keep going in. And I decided that it was not. And I would rather go into consulting, design consulting, or engineering consulting instead. That had been an idea that I had in my head for a while. So I'm glad I was already starting to think about it so that when it came time to make the decision, I could say like, okay, comfortably, I'm not going to go and continue this drone space. And then it became a question of like, okay, well, how do I then implement it? So I got laid off and then I kind of just like wallowed for like a kind of long time, like a month, which doesn't sound that long, but it felt like a really long time to just sit on my ass and be sad. And then my partner at the time pretty much told me to get it together and either enjoy it and like be fun employed and be present in it or to start looking. So I took his advice. It's not terrible advice. And I traveled for a while and just kind of reset, got away from the Bay Area, got away from everything around me so that I could focus on my own thoughts. Came back way more refreshed and ready. And then I started to seek out consulting jobs. Like I knew that's what I wanted to get into. And then, well, I'm an engineer, so I built a spreadsheet and there was like a massive list of places that I was cold calling or trying to connect with. And I chased that it also felt like a really long time. And then I landed a job with New Deal Design and worked there as an engineer.
Why consulting? It's always curious to me how people make those decisions, either like startup, established big company, or like consultancy.
Well, I'd done the startup thing and I was a little over it. And while I was working at the startup, I worked for two people who had both left Frog to come to that startup. And in working with them, I realized it was super fun learning from them because they had all these random pieces of knowledge. Like I could ask them about something and they're like, oh yeah, like that one time we worked on the project and it required us to use this particular type of spring, which I would have never found on my own. And so it was cool to see that through their history of projects, they've been exposed to so many different tools or tricks or whatever else. And I really thought that that was a very cool way to learn. It's like very fast, but very broad. That was it. There's not too much thought past that.
And so from New Deal, then you jumped to Frog. Was that the direct move?
Yeah. After New Deal, I went to Frog.
Okay. Since you had known people from Frog when you got there, did you have any like notions of what it was going to be like? And did it match your expectations?
Yeah, I think I had some notions, but I think the notions that I had built up were mostly around consulting as a whole industry rather than Frog specifically. And so they definitely matched. I was learning super fast. I was on projects that were kind of very diverse, learning and seeing a lot of things very quickly. Frog is kind of, it has a reputation, right? And so going into Frog, it was a very cool moment for me. I had ages ago heard about Frog and now I was actually there. And so in that sense, it did meet up to my expectations, but I will say that my expectations were vague. And so it was kind of cool to actually get to Frog and then discover it for myself without having too many things to measure it up against.
Yeah, so maybe in your description of what you're excited about consultancy, it's like this getting to learn a lot of different things that
Mhm.
seems to come into play well again, as you've told us that now you're doing Yona like pretty independently. What's it been like for you to take on that variety of skill sets?
I love it. I actually really find doing a wide range of things way more interesting than focusing on one, which might speak to my personality and ADHD and all these other things. But I don't know. I find it really exciting to see how things tie to each other too. So like you're working on a business case, but that business case is supported by engineering decisions and vice versa. And I just find those relationships really interesting.
Do the relationships and like what needs to happen, like that work that would normally be covered by multiple different disciplines, is it like really apparent to you what to do? And then you just go and do it?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like how have
No.
you learned each one of the skills? We gotta walk us through that a little bit.
No, day to day, it's like I sit down, I'm like, all right, today I should do this thing, but maybe I should do the other thing instead first. And then I do both kind of halfway. And then at like lunch, I'm like, all right, I've actually completely not finished either one. So there's a lot of times where I'm like, I'm really not sure at all what I'm supposed to be working on. And there's nobody to tell me what I'm supposed to be focused on. Sometimes it becomes very obvious. There's like a deadline or something I'm working towards, and it's like, all right, got to get it together and focus on this thing. But sometimes it's very much like, okay, well, like, let me work on this. And as I'm working on this, I'm like, oh shit. Okay, I forgot. Like, this thing is now reminding me I have this other thing that I need to like research. And so there is a little bit of me just hopscotching around on my own. But I think that's part of it. I hope that's part of it because that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It does become very apparent to me when there are moments of like I have reached my capacity here. And that's been interesting because then you have to make a decision of like, okay, well, am I going to double down and Google and learn what I need to learn in this moment? Or is this a moment where my time is more effectively used elsewhere and I just need to ask somebody else for help? That's a decision moment that comes up fairly often. Most of the time for me currently, it's like just Google it because I don't exactly have the funds or whatever else to pull somebody else in to help me. I do have wonderful advisors who help me out, and so there are people I can turn to when that decision is like, all right, should I be like, is this the thing to put money towards or like put time towards? I have people to help me decide that, but it does come up a lot.
How is it different working with team members versus these advisors? I have an idea of what is different, but yeah, maybe tell us practically how that goes.
Yeah, the analogy is like one is you're rowing a boat with three other people, and the other one is you're the captain, and there are people telling you things that are in the water, and you're trying to generally avoid them. Does that does,
It's like if you have other rowers versus you have like three coxswains that are all just like yelling different like supportive
yeah,
directions at you.
supportive directions, kind, gentle, very helpful directions, but you're
Yeah.
like, I've only got these many arms. I can't get this going any faster.
Oh, that's amazing. This is a slight detour from the conversation, but can you tell us how you established the relationships and built like people that you really think are advisors that are good for this type of support? Because I'm sure there are people that are entrepreneurial out there that would like to know how they might build that.
Yeah, it's a journey that I'm on also. I'm very fortunate in the advisors that I have currently are relationships that have built over time through connections that we've had. So one of my advisors is a connection through a friend, and we met her early on. We've gotten to know her. We know that our mission aligns, our general attitudes towards what needs to be done aligns. And so it's been kind of like an ongoing process that we've built together. Our other advisor is actually somebody we used to work with. And she's this amazing, like we call her our mama bear at some point because she cares not only about our product, but about us as people. And that's also just been a personal relationship that's built over time. And one of my co-founders is also now an advisor, which has been a really
Cool.
lovely, like she's both to me and she's also a really great friend. And so a lot of this is just personal relationships and finding new advisors is a process that I'm in as well. And it's about meeting people and connecting with them. And I know that sounds very generic and bland, but I'm not really sure how else to describe that because that is really what it is, right? Like you want people who are on the same page as you, but also who know you well enough or are willing to push you in a way that's positive for both you and for what you're working on, but also is supportive, And so finding that is really about vetting the person and their personality beyond just their skill set. Some people have given me the advice that finding an advisor is like dating. Sure, I guess so. I mean, you're getting to know people, right? And there are advisors who are technical advisors who maybe you need a specific skill set for a specific amount of time, and that's fine too. But for me personally, like the advisors that I have currently are more than just a transactional advisor. They're people that I want with me the whole way.
Yeah.
That's lovely, like to have that kind of relationship with so many people for doing a project like this.
Yeah, I feel very, very lucky for my advisors.
I think that also the amount that they would care about your personal well-being is super interesting and like obviously crucial when we talk about it, but maybe could get overlooked by somebody who's just really, really dead set on finding like just this really smart advisor that can tell them how to do a skill set, right? Their investment in you as a whole human and that connection to you and your business is really important, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we'll call it like a softer side of mentorship and advisorship. That's hard to quantify or capture, but it is very special, and I think it makes the work side of things work even better because I know that when they're advocating for something, they're taking into account both what I can do, what's best for me, and what's best for everything that we're working on together.
Mm. How often do you feel like they push you beyond like what you would have thought your own capacity was?
I would say often, sometimes in like a technical way where they're
Mhm.
like, "Hey, have you thought about doing this?" And
Mhm.
I'm like, "No, I haven't," or like, "I didn't think of that." And so thank you for the push because now I know to even ask for something that I didn't know was possible to ask for before. And then sometimes in a very personal way where they're like, "Oh yeah, you should send that email. Like you should advocate for that thing. Like this is fine, push for it again when you don't hear back."
Mhm.
And so they're challenging me in that way as well.
I feel like you gave us quite a lot of good practical advices here, but would you maybe share how do you find motivation to be consistent and find energy for all of that?
I'm laughing because I wish I knew. Consistency is so hard. I have days where I am unstoppable. Like there are days where I'm like, yes, I am on it. I'm killing it. Amazing. And then the next day I will be like 0.5% of what I was the previous day. And it'll be the most heartbreaking drop of like, what am I doing? Like, why I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing today. I've done nothing but send 2 emails.
Mhm.
And it's hard to stay consistently high because that's not sustainable. And you can't be consistently low either. So the question around consistency, I truly wish I knew, and I truly wish I had a better answer. So if anybody out there does know how to maintain like a consistent level every day, please tell me because I don't know. In terms of energy, I think that oh, energy is also hard, and I think I just have to ride the highs and lows as I get them. Like if I'm in a okay, like right now I'm just super energetic and focused about this thing, like I'm gonna just push it while I
Mhm.
can. I'll do the other things that I must to keep things going. That's fine. But I have energy around this one thing. Like I'm gonna push this one thing, and just maximize that for as long as I can. There are just gonna be days where I'm like, these things are like I'm slow, I am whatever. And during those days, I'll just do what I can and still try to chip away at what needs to be done, and then maximize the other days when I am on it.
And above all of that, the motivation.
The motivation, I think like there's multiple sources of inspiration and motivation, right? So there's an internal one, which is like, is this what I want? This is what I want. So this is what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
I care about Yona. I care about this product. That's what motivates me internally. And then sometimes it's like, okay, well, I feel lost. And then, it's depending on my advisors or my co founders to be like, this was a thing that we started. We have to keep going with the thing that we started. And so there's a little bit of an external push there. And then there's also the external push, which is whenever I talk to patients or providers or, hear about people who want Yona or want something, it doesn't even have to be Yona. They just want a better experience in their reproductive care or what have you, then that becomes the motivation of like, okay, well, I'm working on it. They need it. I need to keep going because at some point they're going to really want it or really need it. And if I'm not working on it, maybe somebody else is, but I don't know for sure. But I get to choose that I'm working on it in this moment.
Mhm. How much do you think that the product has changed or stayed the same since it became like all on your shoulders?
I think it has changed. I think the product has changed. I have chosen to change the focus in certain ways. I've moved away from just the pelvic exam as a focus. I've tried to think more about like all the applications of speculums. There are many.
Wait, what else is there?
So there's preventative medicine, which is the pelvic exam, and that's a big piece. But there's also a lot of like treatment based procedures. So you go in for symptoms or bleeding, and so a provider will use that as a diagnostic tool. And if they find something abnormal, they might use it as a treatment tool as part of a treatment set, whatever it might be. It's also a big part of abortion care sometimes. It can be a part of oncology care. It can be a part of a lot of things. And so just understanding, like if speculums are going to be changed, we might as well change it for all these other applications. So it's the same tool.
How much do you think the other applications have affected your thinking, or is it just affecting your research and involvement of those other providers?
Both, I would say. So it has affected who I speak to and what I'm learning from them. And that is then going to affect how I think about this product. So all of these different practices have different needs. And some of them just use speculums more or less than the other. They have different environments that they're using it in. Like an OR is different than a clinic room or an outpatient. And so all of these inputs that I'm hearing are, I think, going to potentially make changes for Yona and for the Yona speculum going forward.
I feel like this is so like illustrative of how difficult it is for us to think about this product. Like we're just like, how does it get used? What are their applications? And even though it's like a huge cornerstone of our health.
If you think about it from like a technical perspective, any procedure or exam that requires visualization of the vaginal canal or the cervix or to provide access to the uterus requires a speculum. So in
Right.
that definition, it becomes much wider.
Yeah, I think that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around what makes all of them different. I think the OR versus like in the room where the patient is like awake and part of the experience is maybe the most obvious distinction that I
Mhm,
can follow.
mhm.
Obviously, you want to suit all of these scenarios, all of these like needs, all of these different players, but how do you pick your highest priority?
I think I am approaching it as focusing on the things that are the most common across all of these. So,
Mm,
there are asks around the sizing and the shape of the speculum that are going to be pretty universal across all of these different procedures. There is the need, just from the provider standpoint, of a good field of view of the cervix and of the surrounding tissues. And then there's a need to be able to get implements or tools in there as well. And so those are kind of some really core requirements that are pretty universal. And then from there, you end up seeing edge cases around like, oh, this particular procedure requires a particular coding or whatever else on the speculum. It's like, okay, cool. That doesn't happen super often, but that's good to know that it needs to happen at some point. So I can just, if I can address both at the same time, great. And if I can't, now I understand that that's going to be a little bit further down.
I like just have so many specific questions. We don't have to ask all of them because it might be boring, but I feel like our listeners are also curious about some of it. Like, are there going to be a bunch of sizes? I know that you can generally expand them or not, but like, are there different starting sizes that you guys are going to target?
Yeah, we definitely want to target a wide range of sizes. So already speculums come in a huge range of sizes. This is not something that a lot of people know, which,
Right.
I've learned through this, right? Most people don't know.
Do you even pick your size? How do they give you a choice?
Usually you do not get a choice because most people do not know what speculum size they should use, right? Like that's not
Right.
common knowledge at all. So most providers will just pick for them. But yeah, speculums come in a huge range of sizes from as small as pediatric speculums to like very, very large speculums. And those have all different sorts of uses. And providers have to go through this guessing game a little bit of like, which speculum should I start with? And sometimes it's literally which speculum do I have today to use? That might just be the starting point. In talking to providers, a lot of the providers are very empathetic. So they try to start as small as possible,
Hmm.
minimal discomfort. And then if that doesn't work, then they'll go up in size. But not all providers know to do that. So it's kind of a mix.
They don't know to do that. They're supposed to be the expert.
Nobody ever bothered to tell them.
No,
Right.
like for example, like there is the like a normal average Graves or Peterson's speculum is like kind of a standard. And so perhaps a provider only knows to use the standard and they might not know that, like a patient who has vaginismus might actually need a pediatric speculum instead. Like that
Mhm.
would be a better starting point if any speculum gets used at all. So some providers just might not know that.
This is also really specific, but I don't feel like there's a lot of care paid to like the end that touches the cervix. Like it just sort of tapers down to a point, the way that you might put anything in that's like an insertable, but that's not like the shape on the inside, right?
So I have a
Um,
bunch of speculums on my desk, so we're going to look at it for a minute. So a lot of
yeah.
these speculums have these like rounded
It's like
fronts.
a duck bill. We have to
It's like a
describe
duck
for the
bill.
listeners. Yeah.
And then almost all of them have an underbite where the lower bill extends farther out than the upper bill.
Right.
Here's a side view.
Margaret, you look alarmed.
Yeah, we had a discussion about it last week after talking to you for the first time, because we were, is it stainless steel or is it plastic?
You got both.
Here we go. We've got both on hand. But yeah, I just more recently learned that this underbite, this like scoop at the
Yeah.
bottom, is so that when you're actually, like going in to find the cervix,
Yeah.
a lot of people have cervixes that are in different positions. And so you kind of need to like scoop it into place. The cervix
Oh
isn't
my
just like
God.
a flat thing. It's like a rounded donut shape almost. Because it kind of protrudes a little, you use the bottom to kind of scoop it, and then the top one to kind of gently, hopefully gently, hold it in place so that you can do your swabs or whatever else.
Yes, I'm vaguely
Oh.
remembering some of these facts. My provider is like very she's very forthcoming about trivia. So
Okay.
she was like telling me a bunch of stuff while I was there, and it was a little bit, it had the awkwardness of like when the dentist talks to you.
Uh-huh.
Except you could talk back, so I was just like, but I don't know what to say. And just her trying to explain that, like, specifically about the cervix, like,
Mhm.
some people are really sensitive because of how, like, the nerve endings work. So, like, then it's just horrible and, like, there's almost no way around it. But some people almost feel nothing.
Mhm.
So that's not unusual either, because
Oh, that's really
the
interesting.
nerve endings, like, are on the other side, basically. And it's, like, the luck of the draw.
I did not know about that, about the nerve distribution in the cervix. So thank you to your provider.
Yeah, she was, like, fascinated by it. And I was like, thank you.
That's actually really cool. Your provider sounds awesome. I want to go see
Yeah,
them.
agreed.
Yeah, she's the bomb.
Okay, interesting. So also just like the research that you can do, I'm sure there's a lot, but you're working a little bit in the dark because this is like still this area of the body that we just don't spend a lot of medical attention on, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, OB-GYNs and midwives and nurse practitioners spend a ton of time, but
True.
unfortunately for me, I am not one of them. And so I'm learning secondhand from them, which has been it's fun and informative, honestly, to know these things.
What is like one of the strangest like areas where you've become really, really knowledgeable in this project? Just something that you like deep dove into that you're like, well, didn't know I was gonna know about that in my lifetime, but now.
I mean, I think it's less like the topic is like, I know a lot about vaginal tissue and cervixes now that I really have no business knowing because I'm not an OB-GYN or a midwife. But I think like the thing that's really changed for me is how comfortable I've gotten in terms of talking to people about it, total strangers, about
Mm-hmm.
everything in this space, right? It's kind of like generally uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I'm glad that I'm also overcoming this hesitation to talk about it. But a couple weeks ago, there was a conference in San Francisco of OB-GYNs, and I happened to be at lunch with a friend nearby. And so this was like a purely coincidental thing that I chanced upon this entire conference of OB-GYNs. And so I dismissed my friend from our lunch and then proceeded to do intercept interviews. And afterwards, I was reflecting how strange it was that I just approached strangers and was like, "Hi, can I ask you questions about the vagina?" And they were both willing to engage in conversation with me, and then we would have good conversation. And like within 5 minutes, we're standing on the sidewalk and they're doing like okay, and then you like move the labia tissue in order to insert the speculum. Like we got so fast into the depth of these conversations, and there was no hesitation, there was no weirdness. I mean, I know they're OB-GYNs and they're in the conference, then they're in that headspace, but I would not have imagined myself getting to that place like 10 years ago if you asked me.
That's really cool.
Like quickly speaking the user's language
Mhm.
and just like getting straight to the point. Absolute design skill. I love it.
Yeah, and I think that there is also like a piece of this, which is like if I want other people to be comfortable talking about reproductive health, then I need to be comfortable doing it too. And this is like truly the depth of it for me.
Yeah.
And I also think that like being super technical is a piece of that. Like if I'm not weird about it, then it's not weird.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, of course, you have to focus a lot of your energy right now on the actual product and getting placement of the product into hospitals. But also, is there going to be a second phase of this, or is there a current phase where you're focused a lot on the educational element?
When you say the educational element, you mean like teaching patients, teaching
Yes,
providers?
teaching patients and providers, like how if the product will come alongside any specific videos or like a person that goes to demo it or anything like about the way that you're trying to change conversations around the speculum.
Well, I think education is just like a bigger piece that's not necessarily its own phase. That's just an ongoing thing. Like I feel like
Mhm.
every moment that I have is education because either I'm learning from a patient or from a provider and hearing about them, or they're learning from me something that I had just learned from somebody else.
Mhm.
And I think that is super, super important. And so when I'm doing interviews right now, like when I'm talking to providers, that's a huge learning moment for me. And I'm hugely appreciative of it. But something I've noticed is that as I talk to providers, one person will say, like, oh, I've run into this problem. And then I'll be like, oh, like a couple interviews ago, I talked to somebody else and they ran into this problem too, but they solved it this way. And so being a conduit for some of these has been really fun.
Wow.
I guess I hadn't thought about education as like a separate phase for Yona because it always has just been a piece of Yona in an ongoing way.
Right. Just to be having a conversation about a speculum again, right? When it's like a product we actually have been ignoring for so long.
Yeah.
And with all this like research and knowledge you gather along the way, what do you do with it? Because we know that you have a really good free notebook system, and there is more systems in place that help you function.
Yeah, so I have a 3 notebook system that I've had to build up over a long period of time. They're always with me. I have like a planner, a written planner, because I'm old school and I like it, and that's how I remember things. I have a notebook and a sketchbook, and those are the physical ones. And then on top of that, I have a whole Google Drive of notes, notes for everything, like folders for everything, and that's how I'm actually keeping everything organized so that I can refer back to it. Because otherwise, it's all lost. If it's not written down, it's forgotten.
At this point, you have years of work to refer back to. So, like, how often do you like thumb back through things, or recompile, or even maybe like synthesize information across a long period of time or lots of interviews? How do you do that work?
Yeah, so I actually refer back to earlier stuff pretty often. Sometimes it's referring back to previous presentations because I've already done the synthesis work, so I'm just pulling out what I need. Sometimes it's to go back to old interview transcripts to pull out specific quotes of things that people are saying so that I'm not misquoting them. And sometimes it's to just go back and look at old applications of things that I found. Like if I've saved an application, it tends to be pretty helpful because in the moment I'm thinking about like articulating things in a really nice way that's to do it again. So I do refer back to my notes a lot, actually.
Yeah, I wish I was that organized.
Yeah, same. I'm just in awe.
It leads me to another comment I wanted to make, and something you shared with us earlier, is that at some point you realize not everyone is that organized.
No. Well, I think I realized that I have the capability of being extremely disorganized. And so if I don't keep that shit under control, it's going to happen. And so for me, it's like all in or not. And so I think like a lot of my old coworkers are probably like, oh, you're super organized. And I'm like, this is unnatural for me. Like, if I were not organized, then everything would fall apart. So I have to be to keep it together. And so, I mean, like right now, you see my post-its. The post-its are color coded around me. I have the notebooks. Like, if I didn't, I would have actually no idea what I'm doing and would forget things all the time.
When did you start developing your systems, or like what's your earlier memories of like solving that feeling of being disorganized and being like, I can like do this. This will solve that.
I don't know why I was thinking about this, but I recently remembered this like particular moment of like, I don't know, it was like 3rd grade or 4th grade. And like waking up, I had just gone to sleep and waking up and being like, shit, like I didn't do this thing. And I'm like, I don't know, 8-year-old Fran, like absolutely losing my mind. And then trying to sneak out and do my homework in the hallway because I didn't want my parents to know that I'd forgotten to do this
Oh
thing.
my God.
And I remember like that was the beginning of the chaos of like, I had forgotten to do a worksheet, I forgot to do something. And then I got like, there was like a year when we had to get planners for some reason with like a little tear out corner. And this like tear off corner changed my world because I was like, this is the most fun thing in the world. Like, let me tear off the corner of the page so that I know the page is done. And it's like such a dumb thing. But that was when I started using like a way to write down things. And then I started remembering things. And then I realized I needed other notebooks. And so that's kind of how everything started evolving.
Yeah, I remember those. My mom used to have those calendars, and I was just tearing off those corners randomly.
Okay.
Pastime.
All right.
Yeah, I
I'm
had a
so happy
planner
to
like
hear
that,
that
too.
like I'm not the only person ripping corners out of planners.
I didn't use my planner though. I doodled in it.
Okay.
No, but also Margaret is a menace for you. If you guys had been sharing a planner, like she's just tearing off corners when she
That's
feels like
true.
it with like no
Yeah, it's
regard
It's
to the
lost in
day.
time. It's December already. I'm sorry. We're here. That's what the page says.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so you just kept adding, I guess, like notebooks or functional pieces, like as you had things you needed. Like I guess at some point you're like, I need a sketchbook, so there was like plain paper. The notebook I assume is for notes, and then
Yes.
you color code the sticky notes. Have the colors always been constant?
No. Yeah. So no, the colors haven't been constant. They have changed. But yeah, I think generally the process has been like I needed something, didn't know that I needed it, messed up a bunch of stuff, eventually found out I needed it, added it, and then evolved from there. The notebook sketchbook thing happened probably when I was at New Deal, I think. I remember there were like meetings where I was like, I'm trying to doodle something really quickly and I just have a stack of paper and I keep losing it and people keep walking off with my sketches and it's really annoying. So then I got a sketchbook and I remember it's like a children's Crayola sketchbook with a skunk coloring on the front. And I was like, okay, that's cute. This is perfect for work. And so that was the beginning of that. Yeah, the color coding has changed, but generally blue is like work stuff. Green is like random like life things. And then yeah, there's like a couple of other colors, but I can't remember what those categories were. This didn't last, apparently, this color coding. I'm realizing right now.
Work in progress.
Work in progress.
We will finish conversation and Fran would go to the wall and rip all of them down. And come up
Yeah, I mean, if the colors are not color coded, then they're not really doing anything. So now I am thinking about why that's like that.
Oh, no.
I feel we can't be poking holes in your system.
This is evolution. This is good. This is good. This is learning and growing.
What has like running this business helped you hone about your skills versus what do you think you already were really good at that has like lent itself to the way that you're doing this?
I mean, the organization thing is like the biggest thing because if I were not organized, I would lose all the stuff all the time. But I think like this process of working on Yona and being on my own in this latter part of Yona has really forced me to think about, Margaret, your earlier question around energy and motivation. And I think that that is something that is still really hard for me, managing these cycles of like, oh, I'm really motivated or I'm really not motivated and not being able to consistently manage that. I think the process that I'm in right now is to make the most of what I have in that moment. Like if I am just really motivated, I will use it. And so that's a process of learning right now in Yona of like, okay, that is what I'm going to work with. Or like, if that's a strategy of like, I'm not going to try to like beat myself into motivation because that doesn't work. And instead just like use the motivation that I have.
Speaking of the motivation and kind of your feedback loop of like work and reward, you talked about you spending your volunteer time at a wildlife hospital and that it has these kind of like manual menial tasks of feeding the animals and cleaning things up, and that has a lot of direct feedback of like feeling rewarding, and that you compared that to working on long product development, and it's like a direct contrast, and that you kind of need the wildlife hospital and that feeling sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about like identifying that difference and like understanding what you need?
Yeah, I need both, to be honest. Like, I need that immediate, like, oh, I did a thing and here's what happened. And also, like, I like the idea of like, I'm working on a thing and it might not pay off right away, but it will in the long run do something. And so, working on Yona and volunteering at this wildlife hospital are total opposites in that way, but they're both parts that I need. And so, like, working on Yona is a long bet. It's a bet for me personally. It's a bet for Yona. It's a bet for reproductive care in some way as well. But these are all like long run things that I don't know the outcome of. I don't know what the reaction to my action is going to be. And so like I could send 100 emails today, but X many are going to get back. I don't know which ones and I don't know when. I could like work on this deck, but I don't know who's going to see it later on or like what's going to be the reaction. I don't know if I put this time into Yona, if it will pan out or not. So there's a lot of unknowns and it's a very long time scale. But working at a wildlife hospital, like I go in and I chop a sweet potato up and then I give said sweet potato chunks to like an animal and the animal eats it. It's like done. Okay, I did that. And now I can move on. Or like we clean up poop or whatever. It's like this cage is clean out and before it was dirty and I did that. Like done. That's an easy transaction. And so both have their own types of satisfaction and I need both of them.
Are there any ways that you can pepper that kind of feeling into Yona where like are there any smaller tasks that kind of have the same effect?
Yeah, for sure. There are moments where I have small victories of like, oh, there's this person I wanted to talk to for a really long time and I finally was able to connect with them and learn from them. Or like I set up a call that was kind of like, meh, don't know what's going to happen. And then I end up meeting a person who's founded another company and they're super knowledgeable about other things. And it's like, boom, instantly now I have a new network person, somebody who gets me and gets the state that I'm in. So there are definitely these moments of like short victory of like I did a thing and something has come out of it. And generally, even though like there are a lot of tasks in Yona that are long term and like mysterious or vague, there are infinite numbers of good things that have happened along the way. I feel like people have just been super generous the whole way with their time, their energy, and just like with support. And that's been kind of like a short run victory. Like every time I have one of these interactions, it's been like very great to see like, okay, there are people supporting me, people supporting this like product, this mission, or whatever else. Also, like inversely, I have interactions with patients or providers, and it's really great to be able to hear like, oh, well, like, thank you for thinking about it, or like, that we know that somebody is working on it or trying to. It's like, oh, okay, that's like a small victory right away.
Definitely.
Do you feel that animals are equally grateful when they get sweet potato?
No, completely not grateful.
No.
And I'm okay with that.
You have such a positive view of that transaction, because I would just be like, look at you every day pooping, like
Pooping.
another poop.
Yeah.
Can't believe I have to scoop it.
No, I mean, I don't mind. I think it's endearing that they don't give a shit about us. Like, it's great. Like, that's the best outcome, is if they're like, we're here, we ate some stuff, we pooped, and then we were sent back into the wild, and that was like a weird chapter in our life. Like, that's ideal. But yeah, I'm okay with that interaction.
Oh yeah, because those animals don't like stay there and know you. They eventually go back somewhere else, and you might never see them again.
Yeah, the ideal case is that we release them and we never see them again, and they go forth and live their wild life.
Although I have an idea, because like you talking about founding of Yona and like talking about the first doctor that came up with speculum, and like you talking to all these people, talking to the OBGYN conference members in SF, I keep thinking of a documentary movie about you and how you founded the thing and how it got made. I see the scene when you go and ask about vaginas in the like lunch cafe, and then the last scene when like you're super successful, you go to Yosemite, and then like I know a bird comes, like bald eagle comes in, and it recognizes you because you were cutting mice for it like 5 years ago, and like then it's the scene that like you look at it and it looks at you and like
We recognize each other.
shows you, yeah, recognize each other, and then, like,
Acknowledgement.
Well, if I become famous and they make a documentary, you get to art direct it, because that's the best ending I could come up with.
Oh my god. Modern day Snow White for like the craziest, most intense animals. That's the best.
Yeah, what was the craziest, most intense animal that you had there? Like probably raccoon. You said like raccoons are dirty.
They are. I mean, I don't think we get any like crazy. It's like the wildlife hospital is in like a suburb. You know, we're not getting like
Okay.
crazy animals.
Wolverines.
Ending. You get to a certain point with Yona and you're like celebrating in mission, and then like you go waste at middle of the night, and then the raccoon approaches and recognizes you.
I would be fine with that too. Although that would be also kind of scary. Right? Like if a raccoon just like started following you, you would be alarmed, I think. I would be alarmed.
I wouldn't be.
Margaret would be over the moon. She loves raccoons.
Okay,
but
they are-
yeah, creepy. A little creepy.
Yeah,
They're cute.
you should probably not approach said raccoon. But I understand where you're going with this.
It's just like probably not well, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
that
I mean-
raccoon is sick.
yeah, they don't want to interact with you. Like you're lovely, Margaret, but raccoons don't want to hang out with you. I'm sorry to say. Like they just don't
Okay.
need us around. They'd rather just go about their day.
Let me just say one thing. I grew up watching Pocahontas as a non-American.
That's where your love of raccoons comes
That's
from.
yeah.
Disney did really gloss over some raccoon facts there.
It's like expectations regarding men and marriage, and like expectations regarding wildlife.
I would say that the level of realism that Disney presented around Prince and marriage is about equivalent to the amount of realism with the raccoon.
Yeah, that's fair. They did a lot of like positive propaganda for all of the above.
About heterosexual cisgender men and raccoons.
Yep.
They're so great. They're so
great.
cute. Don't you just want to hang out with them?
Yeah, when they approach you, things
Like
start
you
singing.
mean heterosexual men or raccoons? I got lost.
All the above.
Both. All the above. All the propaganda. Oh my god.
This is why we choose the bear.
Mhm.
This is why we choose the
Yeah,
bear
which is
as
the
well.
bear.
No
I had
question.
a situation last week, and I'm definitely in the camp bear.
Oh, that's
I
right.
can't even believe that's offensive to people. It just feels so obvious to me. But yeah, actually, real quick, we've never taken a WID team vote on. It sounds like we're all bear.
Team bear.
Team bear.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Easy.
Well, Fran, it's been so fun having you on. Before we totally devolve into chaos, I think we'll ask you our like final question that we always want to ask a guest to get you to celebrate yourself a little bit, which is, what is the thing that you bring to the table in design or engineering or however you see it that really is uniquely yours and the reason that we need you to be here doing this work?
I don't know that it's uniquely mine, because I think and I do hope that other people have it too, but I pride myself on being curious to the point of being maybe like too curious. I think that is a key piece of design, is the willingness to ask questions and pry on things that like might not be comfortable or easy to ask about. So being open, like curiosity requires you to be willing to hear an answer that might be different than what you expect. I find it fun to ask questions and to learn about people or things or whatever they're doing. And I think that is not uniquely mine. I just happen to really enjoy that part.
Well, and if anyone's not like that, then come on over. The water's great.
Yeah. Go and talk to some OB-GYNs. Ask them stuff. I don't know.
Ambush them at their
Yeah.
conference.
That's right.
Not stalking them at all. Definitely.
If you call it an intercept interview, it sounds very professional.
Oh,
That's right. That's a totally pro tip right there.
It's true.
Well, Fran, how can people keep track of your progress with Yona and definitely be aware of it when it comes out? Stay in touch with you if they'd like to.
Our Instagram is @Yona.care and our website is yonacare.com. It's just me right now, so you might not get a response right away, but doing our best. And then if you feel so compelled and you want to reach out to us, it's info@yonacare.com.
So exciting. Well, thank you for being on the show. It was really nice to chat with you.
Yeah, it was so great. Thank you all for having me. That was really fun.